So we're here to solve this Yajilin by Grant Fikes called backslash. It's about 95% a Monday puzzle, and then the very last steps are going to look much harder. And so I think we'll focus most of the video on talking through the ending of this puzzle. But to just give you a sense of the start, the 3-down clue with 5 cells to fill in is a very force shaded pattern. The loop ends go quickly around those squares. We actually have the lower left corner now filled in, a single isolated cell the loop can't go into. We now have these loop ends that want to keep extending but can't touch each other. The 2 down has just 1 cell left to go. Again, these loop ends are dodging. We get to a space like this. In a corner where we've got just 2 cells along an edge, you can't shade one of these because then the loop can come in but can't go out. So you always have to enter a path and use 2 cells along an edge. And that's actually the same, just from the location of the gray cells, the same observation can be made down here. What we'll see is we actually put in the fact that these 0 up clues are in here. We form a similar situation with this 2 right clue. We've got to shade 2 along this edge, but we can't put shaded cells in a way that we would isolate the single loop end. So the loop will always have to have 2 cells between shaded cells. And that makes this pattern in the grid for sure. The 1 up with this corner cell marked is now forced in this way. This 2 left is forced to have 1 more shaded cell to complete the clue. Cornering around that shaded cell, we're going to have a channel form, but we can't go across it because these loop ends would close too soon. So you get this in the pattern in the grid. There's a little bit of a sneaky deduction up here, but if this loop end and this loop end come together, we isolate 2 cells, which the loop can't go into, so we've always got a corner through this cell to make this work. Once this loop end comes down, we got this coming in. We have to get these 2 ends to stay apart, and I actually see this 1 left clue is already finished. So what we sort of have is that these loop ends are going to come through the bottom but dodge each other. These loop ends are going to keep dodging each other as they come up this 9th and 10th column. And so we're going to get this as the pattern in the grid with 7 cells left that might be shadable. 1 clue left to think about, which is this 1 right arrow. And otherwise what looks to be like a very hard pattern to fill logically. And so this is the Thursday-like sticking point of the puzzle. 2 of the cells that are helpful to mark or think about, maybe the first one people will see is actually this cell, because it's near what would become a 3-way junction, can never be shaded. You'd be forced to come down this channel and this channel at the same time. So a lot of people will be able to see the cell like this isn't shaded, but that's really not the compelling way to prove to yourself there's just one answer for this puzzle. So to show you a sense of how you can think through some of these Yajilin constraints differently, I'm going to go to a general rule that's true with these loop puzzles, which is that the loop itself is always going to be alternating between colors of a checkerboard grid. So it's going to have an equal number of green cells and blue cells, and I could actually keep shading more of the loop. I mean, if we did this all the way, you'll see that the loop is effectively doing green, blue, green, blue, green, blue everywhere it goes. When we're in an isolated part of the grid like this, when we mark in the shading, what we'll actually see is we've got 2 ends in blue and 4 ends in green, which means that to connect them up, and you can also see this by just sort of sketching them up, we'll always need to take 1 more green cell, so here, sorry, 1 more blue cell, then green cell and what remains. And we've got an even number of everything left over, but we took 2 blue and 1 green to get those ends connected. And so we're going to need to have 1 more of these open blue cells filled than a green cell. And so we've got 5 green and 6 blue, and that looks good. So right now, if nothing more were shaded in the grid, we could fill in a tiling. And that's why I was even just drawing. There are tons of ways to do that. But right now, this all works. If I shade, though, one of these cells, and particularly if I shade a blue cell, I must always shade a green cell. And vice versa, if I shade a green cell, I must shade a blue cell. I've got to subtract 1 cell from each of those groups, so we still have equal parity to take an equal number of green and blue in doing this. And the one thing to see in this grid is that this blue cell right here is actually seeing all the remaining green cells that could possibly be shaded. And so this can't be shaded. If we shade the cell, we'll never get a valuable parity for the grid to work out. And when we see that this cell isn't shadable, and then come through and do our key constraints of 3-way junctions, this cell and this cell are both impossible to shade because they will break the spaces just below and to the left of them, or above and to the left of them. We're left with this kind of pattern where we have effectively 2 green and 2 blue, and I have to shade 1 in this row, which means I always shade this green, and because I shaded a green, I always must shade a blue. And I can't shade this one which touches that cell, so I just, to get a valid number of cells remaining in the grid, I've got to shade both of these together. And that's a space where even if people found that this cell up here was shaded, they may still have struggled to find that there was one more cell they needed to shade and had to be of the opposite parity. And so hopefully a little bit of what I'm trying to show you is that there's this concept of filling a valid loop space where the parity will help you get in very tight spaces. Sometimes these rare rules like go in this puzzle. Marking in those shaded cells, we just have to get the loop ends to dodge and fill everything else in. But that's the hard finish, the Thursday-like finish of this otherwise Monday puzzle. So not exactly what you might have been expecting for a Monday, but hopefully you learned a little bit through the challenging finish, including how to track blackened squares in a checkerboard type parity, which is a useful constraint when you're constructing or solving these grids, particularly because every time you put in a gray cell or every time you shade in a blackened cell, you're affecting that parity count. You need to get back to an equal state or you won't have an answer. We'll see you again soon.